Welcome to the Fabulous 413. I'm Khalees Smith.
And I'm Monty Belmonte, an astronaut, an astronomer, and an Ian Anderson. Oh my! Joining us is Dr. Katie Coleman, a flipping astronaut. Like in real life, left the planet, an astronaut. From her website, Coleman is a former NASA astronaut and Air Force colonel with more than 180 days in space, 2 space shuttle missions, and a 6-month expedition to the International Space Station where she acted as the lead robotics and lead science officer.
Katie is an advocate for inclusion in STEM and STEAM fields. She recently co-anchored ABC News Live's coverage of the SpaceX launch and the Perseverance Mars rover landing. Katie is the global explorer in residence at Arizona State University and co-host of the podcast Mission Interplanetary. She's also a research affiliate at the MIT Media Lab. She serves on several boards, including the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History and Greenfield Community College.
Katie's also a UMass Amherst alumna who lives in Western Mass with her husband, Josh Simpson, the world-renowned glass artist, and their 2 sons. She's an amateur flute player, but I think if you're playing professional shows, you're a professional flute player, known for her space duet with Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull, which we'll hear a little bit later in the show, and her work from space with the acclaimed Irish band The Chieftains. She coached actress Sandra Bullock from the ISS in preparation for Bullock's astronaut role in the film Gravity.
Also joining us is our resident astronomer, Dr. Salman Hamid, who is the Charles Taylor Chair and Associate Professor of Integrated Science and Humanities in the School of Cognitive Science at Hampshire College. He holds a PhD in astronomy from New Mexico State University at Las Cruces and a BS in Physics and Astronomy from the State University of New York at Stony Brook. His research and teaching lies at the intersections of science and society. He is also heavily involved in science and astronomy outreach, both in English in the U.S. and in Urdu and South Asia.
But we just call him Mr. Universe for fun. And also joining us is Chris Devine, a musician performing on electric and acoustic violin, mandolin, guitar, flute, saxophone, keyboard, and vocals. He's an actor and a comic, conservatory trained as a violinist. As an all-around session musician, he's appeared on hundreds of releases in many different styles of music, including classical, for people that miss that right now during this hour, jazz, rock, pop, country. His performances have aired on Nickelodeon, Comedy Central, and PBS, public media.
What's that?
Chris toured Europe and Russia for some years in Blackmore's Night as a featured soloist beside legendary guitarist Ritchie Blackmore of Deep Purple. In his theatrical career, he's portrayed many of the iconic roles of Shakespeare and numerous contemporary dramas and comedies, and performs as Ian Anderson in the local tribute to Jethro Tull called Minstrels in the Gallery, playing at the Drake this Saturday. And I promise all 3 of these guests here at the same time will make sense eventually. And if you want to ask a question of an astronaut, an astronomer, or an Ian Anderson aficionado, call or text 1-800-639-9120. We will start first with the astronaut, Katie Coleman. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It is wonderful to be here, and actually with just such fun people, yourselves included.
Now, Salman Hamid and I have talked about you frequently, and even though we talk about astronomy frequently, we're the ones. Yeah, you can feel your ears are burning. This is the first time you 2 have met, which is a great thrill for me to bring this together. And we're going to talk a little bit in just a bit about new spacesuits versus old spacesuits that you used to wear. Salman will be focusing on NASA's newly revealed spacesuits. But for those who aren't familiar with your story, first of all, you're a huge supporter of public media, about this public station as well, which we're really grateful for. And that's where I got to first meet you. And I introduced you to my cohort from 93.9 The River, Joan Holiday, using a more curse version of an F word besides flipping when I introduced you as an astronaut. I said, this is Josh Simpson, the famous glassblower, and his wife, Katie Coleman, an astronaut, a real bleeping astronaut. Because I was over the moon, pun intended, by meeting you. I meet a lot of famous people, but you rarely get to meet a human being who has gone to outer space. Do you wake up every morning and think, or look at the stars at night and say, I was close to them, closer than most human beings ever?
No.
Good. So then I won't put so much emphasis on going there. It's all overrated.
But I do actually look at the moon differently these days. Absolutely. It's actually my husband and I commuted for 24 years.
To the moon?
Yeah, it was long.
Like you do.
Yeah, right.
As one does. But we did commute between Houston and Shelburne Falls for many years, and DC for 2. And somehow it's just really wonderful to know that when you look out, you see the same moon.
Yeah.
And that meant a lot to me. And there's also a great story that I love, and Salman might know. Alan Bean, one of the early astronauts, when he was on the moon, he took with him his astronaut pin, the one that you get when you are certified after training, eligible to be assigned to a mission, this silver pin. And then when you fly in space, and you buy these, of course, you get a gold pin. So he took his silver pin with him to the moon. And before he left, he took that pin and he threw it as far as he could. And so when I look at the moon, I think of Alan Bean's pin up there. And now I think about who will go there and who that we know will go there. They're probably all younger than everyone in this room, I'm just going to say.
Oh, yeah,
okay?
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Would that pin go forever? Or is there enough gravity on the moon that it would make it fall eventually?
Oh, it definitely will fall.
Okay, but
yes.
if it were outside of the moon and you threw it, it would just go forever until it punctures some alien spacecraft somewhere.
Well, we do not throw anything else out. No throwing out the trash. Everything is thrown out in a careful way. Well, everything isn't, but that is the goal, actually. And I will say from the space station, and what you need to do to design missions these days is to make sure that nothing hangs around for a long time, because it is dangerous to the other endeavors that are up there.
So we're speaking with Katie Coleman, who is a Shelburne resident and an astronaut who was in space for 188 days. Is that what it is? 2 missions? Is that how?
So 2 shuttle missions, and then just shy of 6 months. I'm always feel bad about rounding up.
Yes.
But
at that point, especially because so few people get to go, I think you have license to round up your time.
We'll definitely allow it.
But one of the things I'm actually quite proud of is I am actually the first person to bring public radio up to the space station. Ooh. In that we get to, before we go, they ask us what we want to listen to, what we want to watch, that kind of thing. And they would put television news up there, and it would be 24 hours after the news happened. And I said, it's all about bandwidth. And I said, I just would like to hear public radio. And they're like, well, how often? I'm like, well, every day. And so now it's up there all the time for everybody.
So what shows in particular did you want to listen to when you were on the International Space Station from public radio?
Well, we didn't have the fabulous 413.
Not yet.
But
future astronauts, perhaps.
If they're interested, we're available.
Yeah.
I would definitely have that. I mean, you want to mostly just the sort of national, international news and all things considered.
Right.
Just and we do a lot of working out up there, so it's a lot of time sometimes to be able to listen in that way.
For those who don't understand why you have to do a lot of working out up there, why do you have to do a lot of working out when you're up there? Not just so that you look good as an astronaut. It's more to it than that.
There can be a lot of bone loss and muscle loss, and in fact, we are basically really great patients or lab rats for osteoporosis. Because a woman who's 70 years old that has osteoporosis, what she loses in a year, I would lose in a month. So it's really a lot of bone loss. But we've found different ways of, so exercise is here to stay. Exercise, vitamin D. But we're still looking at what are the ways that, we can stay healthy in space, but it really does come right back down here to Earth for keeping people healthy down here, too.
Does it have health repercussions for you now? The fact that you were up there for almost 6 months?
I have a physical every year, so we're always I love being data.
Some people donate their body to science after they've passed, but
I'll just say that whenever one of us has surgery and something comes out, everybody wants to see it. Okay.
Hampshire College astronomer Dr. Salman Hamid, Mr. Universe, you have a question for astronaut Katie Coleman.
Yeah, well, first of all, I also wanted to thank you because I think one of the missions, Chandra X-ray Space Observatory, which is a very crucial observatory for astronomy. So on behalf of astronomers, thank you. But I had a question, and so we talk about dark skies, and in particular these days people are worrying more and more about the light pollution in there. And I'm just wondering because, how was the sky from the space station? I mean, in terms of, and looking from some of the dark skies here, is there any difference, or is it just like a really dark sky up there?
It is really dark if you make it really dark. Believe it or not, we have a lot of light pollution in, for example, the cupola, surrounded by windows, but they don't want you to run into things. So there's all these little lights. Every button has a little light.
Oh, yeah.
And so basically we have a bunch of gym T-shirts, and we've like sewn them together to be like you can put them on things. And you make one way to do it is literally have a T-shirt that you have around your neck. But then you take a big one, and then you put the rest of it duct taped up to the window. And that way, basically you are
This
inside.
is NASA we're talking about, everybody. NASA.
Duct tape, right?
These are the beautiful solutions we come up with when we're forced to.
But it's a lot of work to make it dark enough to see. And I think an astronomer might actually have done that more than I did. But even just looking out, it just looks somehow more three-dimensional. Almost like, if you were going to go there, you could go then a little further and maybe it looks like you could journey through space as opposed to what I feel like just looking at the night sky. It seems it's not one-dimensional, but...
Well, you would also be seeing, the Earth has in a different perspective. So stars would be seeing sort of like, without the horizon.
Exactly.
In some sense, probably that's the...
Yep.
Wow.
And you are actually journeying on the space station. You're going at a very fast rate.
We are.
Do you feel it differently than you feel it when you're on Earth, or did it feel like just being on Earth, or like more like being in a car? Like, did the Earth that you could see below look like it was going fast around in a circle, or does...
We're going like 5 miles a second. Something
pretty
like that.
fast.
Which sounds
I got
really
pulled over
fast,
for
right?
doing that on 91 on the way here.
Yeah, no. Cars can't do that.
Oh yeah, right.
But it doesn't. I mean, it's more. You just get used to this vantage point of being able to look around, to see places, and to me, to look down at the Earth and really feel connected to the places. When we first got up there, we would look out just at night. Because in a way, like the Earth goes by, it's a little overwhelming. And there's like, okay, this is what continent is this, and then after a while, different continents have different sort of textures and colors. And Australia is a different color than someplace that's more red, brown in Africa. But then there's really green places in Africa, and so you get so that at least for me, it would mean something to feel connected to the places as you look out and see them.
It's amazing. We're speaking with astronaut Katie Coleman from Shelburne. We are open to taking your questions at 800-639-9120. I realize that not everybody has headphones in here, so it might be harder to ask a phone-based question, but we might get to that point later in the show if we can dig up some headphones, and I'm definitely not telegraphing a call to the other people in the other room who could potentially bring headphones in here. And we're also speaking with Hampshire College astronomer Dr. Salman Hamid, Mr. Universe, and Katie Coleman is going to be performing the flute somewhere in Amherst, and that is why we have Chris Devine here from Minstrels in the Gallery. It is that is the third piece of the puzzle. It makes sense why we have an astronomer and an astronaut in the studio, but why do we have this incredible musical multi-instrumentalist performer who's gone out on tour with Ritchie Blackmore of Deep Purple? We will get to that in just a little bit. You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on New England Public Media. Welcome back to the Fabulous 413. I'm Monty Belmonte.
And I'm Khalees Smith.
And we are joined live in the studio by astronaut Dr. Katie Coleman, by astronomer Dr. Salman Hamid, and even if you don't have your own doctorate, an honorific from me, the Doctor of Rock, Chris Devine from Minstrels in the Gallery, who will be performing at the Drake in Amherst this Saturday. Now, we will talk more about that show and the music that will be performed and Katie Coleman's role in that, as well as her other...
Very
small role in that, perhaps, but large role intergalactically in the music scene. You're one of the only intergalactic musicians that exist, actually, I guess, technically.
Oh, no way.
One of the only.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because we know Chris Hadfield,
right?
Who was... were you on a mission with him? Is that...
We trained a lot together, never up in this...
At the same time.
Yep.
He had a very famous performance that we may hear a portion of later in the show, too, from the International Space Station. But every Monday, we have a regular astronomy segment on the Fabulous 413 with Dr. Salman Hamid, Mr. Universe. And what do you want to be focusing on today, especially given that we can pepper an astronaut with questions?
Yeah, I mean, this is just a fantastic opportunity because Axiom and NASA, they just... unveiled, in some sense, a spacesuit that will be worn by astronauts landing on the moon, hopefully in the next couple of years. And there were a couple of things. So I wanted to ask you about that. One of the things was that the spacesuits looked cool. They were sort of like black and orange, and I found out sort of like, that one of the designers was also worked on that on For All Mankind, the show.
Oh, good.
The person who designed the spacesuits for that was also designed it for Axiom that they're going to be using. But I wanted to know sort of like what would be different because, between all of us here, I think you are the one who has actually worn a spacesuit.
I wore a fake NASA astronaut spacesuit on the March for the Food Bank once, but that doesn't count.
No.
But maybe, we could reenact it again next year.
Oh,
and
I wear it. When the pandemic hit, I would go grocery shopping in it, much to the delight of the people who worked at the supermarkets, because you had a whole helmet and everything. It was great.
We are not shocked. But even in that suit, it's hard to do stuff. It's hard to eat. It's hard to, you kind of run it. You're bigger than you think, because your suit is bigger than you. And so for spacesuits for the moon, specifically for the moon, they're going to design for that environment, the very dusty environment, and that amount of gravity. So that it's about 20% of our gravity, about a fifth of the gravity that we feel here. So you've seen like the lunar astronauts, kind of bounding across, kind of doing a little, kangaroo, like striding it. It makes it easier. But it's a different environment than one where you're just weightless. And those spacesuits that you see people doing spacewalks on the space station, they weigh about 300 pounds.
No.
And then you want to train. You have to train and practice. And it's hard to do that in a 300-pound suit. And so we do that in a giant swimming pool where we're underwater and they weigh you out so you don't sink but you don't float. And yet somebody like me, who's pretty small, has actually a big air bubble in that suit. And it's kind of like me and my exercise ball have gone for a run.
Is it like
in
when
the
you go
pool.
swimming and you get a random air bubble in your bathing suit?
It's not yes,
Yeah.
but huge, right? But and so that's like dragging you up to the surface. And so the suits have a certain size. They can be adjusted a little bit shorter in the arms or this, but they had some things that were really tough, like on everybody. Which was they're a certain width, and then you want to move your hand across your chest to look at something on the other, to reach something, and you run into that part. Excuse me, and literally, all of us get out of that pool, purple, blue, bruised.
Because you're bruised. Oh, wow.
Yeah, exactly. And especially, they did actually eliminate the small spacesuit at one point. It eliminated about a third of the women from being able to do spacewalks, which are then, it's pretty career limiting not to be able to do all the jobs. Right?
Wasn't that what happened? Wasn't there supposed to be a historic all-women spacewalk, but they ran out of the correct size suits? Am I misremembering that?
Well, this is where it's a longer story, and I won't tell it all, but basically that just what I was saying, eliminating the small spacesuit, that decision back in the mid-90s, that's what put what happened later in motion, is that there weren't enough suits of the right sizes. But that's also, it's a hard problem. They weigh a lot. There's not a lot of room up there, even though the space station's very large, like the size of, football field up there. There's not a lot of room. And so, do you need to bring, small, size small uppers and lowers, and they have big metal rings. So it's not easy to bring all the sizes. And at the same time, I think we've learned that there's real consequences to not designing for everyone. And actually and in bringing in these commercial companies like Axiom, they bring in ideas. I'm excited that I hadn't heard that it was the folks that designed For All Mankind, which is a show that I like because the astronaut corps is not as diverse as we would like, and hasn't been as diverse as we'd like. And so if you want to have some teenager around here look to the TV to be inspired about how history might include them, it's hard to do, and yet shows like that give them inspiration.
We're speaking with real astronaut Katie Coleman, Dr. Katie Coleman from Shelburne, as well as Hampshire College astronomer Dr. Salman Hamid, Mr. Universe from Hampshire College.
Yeah, I was just going to say, to balance it out, maybe I think for the next 30 years, there should only be small spacesuits. So only women can go.
Those of us that are small are like, economics and space economics is coming into play. And once they figure out that it's actually by the pound, I will not be crying for those big people.
It's surprising that that's the one that they decided to discontinue, considering the way that, I would think about it in terms of how they were manning submarines for ages. Like, they wanted people of a certain size, and it was always smaller people to get into the tubes. So it seems like almost counterintuitive to the way that they had run things, that they would get rid of the small suits. But if you're recruiting larger people as a whole for other reasons. And I guess that does make sense. It's just disappointing.
But it is a really great step to be, I mean, and people have wanted to take these steps to have new suits for a long time. But this is not just your spacesuit. This is your own personal spaceship, right? And when you think about how safe you want the shuttle or whatever vehicle you're going up into space, you need these spacesuits, which are actually designed, the ones that we've had up until now are designed right down there across from the Hartford Airport.
Really?
From Bradley. Yeah.
didn't
It
know
was
that.
Hamilton Standard, and then it was, now it's Collins Aerospace in Northrop Grumman.
Wow.
And so, I mean, right down there's real people who live around here who were making, and those systems were designed, and we know they could be safe as they could be. And so designing something really new, it's hugely expensive and very hard to do. And so doing this in collaboration with the commercial companies has been a great thing to bring in new ideas and actually show that if you start small, then you can actually always build them bigger. It doesn't actually necessarily work the other way around.
When was the last time that they were redesigned before this?
Before this would probably be in the early 70s.
That's disturbing.
Wow, they have like bell-bottom spacesuits.
Well, but I mean, think about roads and bridges and things like that around here. I mean, it's a serious infrastructure project to change things and how to reroute and how much money it costs to, So I don't know. It can only go from where we are now. And actually what I think also helps is that at least in the U.S., the astronaut corps is about 40% women now. And so then just by definition, and NASA is committed to having the first woman and the first person of color be the first ones to walk on the moon.
And that's part of the Artemis mission, which is the spacesuits that these have been designed for, right?
Right, and these were also sort of like the mobility was one of the big things that they were trying to show, that unlike the previous missions, especially Apollo missions as well, because they were so heavy. Mm-hmm. And so they were trying to sort of like, bend. But one, which I'm still not 100% sure why, but they said that, the suits that we saw on their release, those were black in color, black and orange. And then they explicitly said sort of like, that when astronauts are actually going to go on the moon, it's actually going to be white because they want reflexive material over there. So they're going to take that off. So it wasn't clear. And I did see somewhere like, what are they hiding? Is that like, are they hiding
always
something?
a conspiracy.
Are they hiding something or not?
Space.
But that was a weird thing. But what they did say that because one of the places where the Artemis mission is going to focus on and where most people are going to be would be the lunar South Pole.
Correct.
And including places where sun never shines. And so it's going to be very, very cold. Mm-hmm. And so that is one thing. It seems like that's a difference from the Apollo spacesuits versus these ones.
Right. And we think spacesuits, but they're like 11 different layers at least. And as a material scientist, I think this is like really cool that you need all these different layers and maybe different ones for different uses on the moon.
Right. And they were specifically talking about the boots. Mm-hmm. Is that because they will be right on the surface and it's so cold, and so that's some new technology that they are using, which I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
They are using it.
Well, and it's just interesting kind of human stuff to me. When we practice that in the pool and we were wearing those big boots, if there's some of those 11 layers, there's some big fold that's making a big crease right across your foot, it is actually unbelievably painful. And so and to me it's interesting. I think there was an award given a couple of years ago for designing new space gloves, and the designers were the Victoria's Secret designers that designed the wings for the models. Okay? And when you think about it, they're used to trying to figure out how to wrangle fabric and utility and mobility and accessibility. And so I like that there's so many more people involved, and I love the look of the new ones because I think it makes especially kids think, oh, it looks like a comic book, right?
Yeah, you can be a hero.
It looks like a suit from an anime series.
Yes. and so I just think it makes it look accessible, and I like it that I don't know if it's on purpose or not, but it doesn't look like the same old thing that people feel like, they didn't invite me back then to be part of it, but now maybe this is something I could have an idea about.
I think they did talk about that. I mean, the look is so important. That's the reason why they brought in sort of like, from For All Mankind, because I think SpaceX, their suits were designed by somebody who did Superman versus Batman. So I think there is this element to it, which, again, I think there is a positive and negative because there is a clear element of sort of like commercialization in there, but I think there is also that there is an attractiveness. I mean, like, you want space to be cool, and not sort of like boring.
That's why I think Katie Coleman is like the coolest person I practically have ever met, and was so starstruck because of how many astronauts you get to meet. And as a kid, I went to space camp for a weekend when I was a kid.
Did you graduate?
It was like a weekend program that I graduated from, but I was terrible at science. And there was, the marketing of space in the 1960s, and maybe, sadly, again, going forward here, was all about militarism and who would be the military power in space. Your era with the International Space Station, Dr. Katie Coleman from Shelburne, mercifully was in a more peaceful time and was very science-focused.
I mean, it's all about Earth.
Yeah.
Really. I mean, the science experiments that we do up there, they apply to understanding how to build spaceships and how to live and recycle all our water, all our air. But those are issues that we face down here as well, how to grow plants in a place that it's hard to do. All those lessons that are great for exploration, they really apply down here on Earth as well. Plus some cool telescopes. And I just want to say thank you for, in fact, I've gone to the Springfield Museum before to get some lessons in how to sort of take people around the sky. And I'm one of those people that buys those books like Curious George, H.A. Rey, because if it's not something you've done for a long time, you don't really know your way around the sky. And I wanted to feel like it was my neighborhood. And so, folks like you have helped me learn my way around quite a bit.
Thank you very much. Although I was going to say that my list of coolest people I've met has also changed now. I mean, I think Katie is on top. Sorry, Monty. I mean,
I'll live. Well, coming up, we'll have more conversation with Dr. Salman Hamid, Mr. Universe, Dr. Katie Coleman, astronaut, and we'll talk about her musical connections with Chris Devine from the band Minstrels in the Gallery, who will be playing on Saturday at the Drake in Amherst. If you have a question for an astronaut, an astronomer, or a multi-instrument, I couldn't find a good A word.
Instrumentalist.
Or Ian Anderson aficionado, you can call 800-639-9120 or text 800-639-9120. More coming up
on the Fabulous 413. Welcome back to the Fabulous 413. I'm Khalees Smith.
And I'm Monty Belmonte. We're joined by Chris Devine, who is a Devine multi-instrumentalist from, where do you live, Chris?
I live in Sunderland.
Good old. We were there. Well, we're going to tell you about that tomorrow on the show. We went to visit a farm in Sunderland.
Had the best morning.
There is going to be a lot of baby goat action on the show tomorrow, so be ready for that.
Yeah.
But you play electric and acoustic violin and mandolin and guitar and flute and saxophone and keyboard and vocals, and you've performed for Nickelodeon and Comedy Central and PBS and toured with the person behind Deep Purple, Richie Blackmore. And now you are part of a tribute to Jethro Tull called Minstrels in the Gallery, who are performing at the Drake this Saturday. Tell us about the band.
Well, it features actually 4 of the finest local musicians, so I do want to give those guys a plug because they're working for me and they're working really hard. I've got legendary Jopie Fitzpatrick on drums, the only legal drummer that can be used in the Pioneer Valley.
We'll give a shout out to J.J. O'Connell.
He is okay, right. He is in every band. Pianist Ken Forfia, who I knew back in the college days at UMass, and Joe Boyle on guitar, who's also very well established and certainly appears with the Young at Heart chorus very often. He's one of their charter members. And finally, Bill Noland, who is a bass player that I've been working with since the mid-'80s, and who was actually the genesis of this band actually happening because we used to do a small Jethro Tull segment in the band that we did back then. We had not seen each other for over 35 years, and when we finally ran into each other, he said, we used to do that Tull thing. We really ought to bring that back. And I'm like, oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah. And I remember you played Hawks and Reed a couple months ago, and people were over the moon excited about how great that show was sold out. So this show is probably likely to sell out, and I'm not allowed to tell you to go buy tickets to the show because of NPR rules.
Can I?
I don't know. Betsy says, our engineer says, FCC rules. So
all right.
Leave it up to you, the listener, to decide what to do with your life. But if you like this music, there may be a sense of urgency to be thinking about it at least. Tell me about what it is about the music of Jethro Tull that inspired you to do this whole Jethro Tull performance.
Yeah. Well, I think my own musicality was kind of an evolution, and that became serious about music as a guitarist as a teenager, and through that had a flute player who came to just a jam session when I was probably 16, 17 years old. And he could sort of wheeze his way through a couple of those songs.
For those who don't know, Jethro Tull features prominently Ian Anderson on flute, which is not the most traditional of rock instrument.
No, in fact, he's really the only one up until...
It's an R&B instrument now. Thank you, Lizzo.
Up until Lizzo. I was going to give props to Lizzo, who is awesome, by the way.
Maybe she wants to come on Saturday.
Really good.
You never know.
Really good player. So anyway, I was just intrigued by that. I also had a very dear friend who was a complete Tull nut. I didn't know the music at all. He said, "Well, here, take this." He said, "This is called Thick as a Brick." I said, "Well, that's a silly name." And this is Passion Play. I said, "Well, I like that. I'm Catholic." So I took these home, and I was so blown away by. I said, "How do you do this with a rock band?" I mean, it was utterly new to me because I was into the Stones, I was into the Beatles. I was like, and I went and I bought a flute the next day. As I'd been a pretty serious trumpet player previous to that, I took to it fairly promptly. So, and that was it was been a love affair kind of ever since. Once I became a serious violinist, I set Tull's music aside for quite a long time, but then the passion was reignited in recent years. Yeah.
We're speaking with Chris Devine from Sunderland, who will be performing this weekend with Minstrels in the Gallery at the Drake down the street in Amherst.
What other instruments do you like to bring into Tull's music? Like, I know when I do covers, I kind of like to break it open, but like, are you guys more purists with your renditions, or do you kind of like to play around with it? Bring in your violins, bring in your trumpets.
Well, it's a great question. I do a violin solo at a special moment in the show that I insert into one of the Tull songs. But because the material is it's very, very familiar to those that are fans of it, right? So they want to expect to hear it in a certain way. Also, the band itself is somewhat nascent. I mean, we've been at it for a while now, but we're not at that point of like, oh God, we have to play it that way again, right? Where we want to start taking it outside. So they're very faithful renditions to the recordings, not the solos. I mean, those because I strongly believe that improvisation should be improvisation at all times. So, and I've never liked seeing a tribute band where they play the solos note for note. It's boring to me.
Shouldn't you mention your outfits?
Oh, you mean my costumery?
My costumery?
Is
it a spacesuit?
Oh well, there isn't much space in this suit in my nether regions anyway.
Perhaps a codpiece of sorts.
Perhaps. Yes. Perhaps.
Ruffles and vests.
Indeed, there are ruffles. There are vests. Are you looking at a picture over there?
No,
I just know.
I've seen pictures of Jethro.
Okay. Well, yes. And my costume, which has been ably assisted by my very talented friend Ann Steinhauser, is kind of a compilation of he would change costume. He would have a different outfit and a different theme for every album back in the peak periods of the 70s. And so mine is sort of a hodgepodge compilation of all those looks.
That way you get away with not having to do costume changes in the middle of the show.
That's true. Although I would have loved to, but not enough time for that. So it does definitely comprises boots, it comprises tights, it comprises vests and frilly shirts, and perhaps an appendage thereupon.
Now, I promised at the beginning of the show that it would all make sense at some point why a person devoted to the style, fashion, and music of Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull, in one Chris Devine, who joins us in the studio, would somehow connect to astronauts and astronomy, and you will be performing with a very special guest at the Drake in Amherst this Saturday, Chris Devine.
Yes, my dear new best friend, Katie Coleman, who was introduced to me actually through your previous guest on Friday, Rosie Kane, who was
another great musician,
my absolute beloved best friend. who Katie had. I'm not sure how you originally became acquainted with her, but at any rate, we had done some Irish shows together over the past few years, and then it came to be revealed that she had actually played with Ian from orbit,
which is incredible. Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull and you, Katie Coleman, did an actual duet, you in space and Ian on Earth.
Well, and I actually brought his flute up there. And so I was I went up to the space station on the Russian Soyuz, very small, right? And back on the same craft. And when I was going to go, there were no space shuttles. They were going to be done with the space shuttle. And so I couldn't bring anything but a couple of pounds in the Soyuz. Suddenly, the shuttle missions were delayed, and a shuttle would be going up and could take some of we've always been allowed to bring things that, mean something to you, your family, local organizations. And getting to go to space is just so special. We often, I think all of us try to bring things with us that bring others with us. I think there was a model of a Galileo telescope that came up there. And I brought a flute for myself. Made in Massachusetts, actually the Powell Company in Massachusetts. And I also brought one for Ian Anderson. And then also I brought an Irish flute. It was about 100 years old.
Wow. And
a penny whistle for a band called the Chieftains. And I tell people that if you brought their flutes to space, you could play with them too.
Well, we actually have the clip of the duet between you and Ian Anderson from the International Space Station and with Ian Anderson from Jethro Tull on Earth. And we'll hear that right now.
Tonight, Ian Anderson and I would like to honor Yuri Gagarin for his brave journey 50 years ago. And we would like to celebrate the role that humans play in the exploration of our universe, past, present, and future, by sharing some music between Earth and space.
Thanks, Colonel Catherine Coleman in the International Space Station. We should remember that today's cosmonauts, scientists, and astronauts are still every bit the rocket heroes they were 50 years ago. So, from the cultural city of Perm in Russia, let's salute Katie, Dima, and Paolo up there in orbit, and of course, the legendary Yuri Gagarin. Go safely.
That was the voice of Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull, who Katie Coleman did a duet with from outer space while Ian Anderson was in Russia on the 50th anniversary of Yuri Gagarin going to outer space. Looking back on that now, what is it, about 10, 11 years ago now, I think, right?
11, yep.
Yep. How does that feel to hear
few
that all
weeks.
over again?
April 12th, which is the anniversary of the first human to leave the Earth. And Ian was playing a concert in Russia. Ian Anderson is the flute player in Jethro Tull. He's the leader of the band. To me, it's like partnership and community. And, he and I are I said, it meant a lot to me that you brought the flute to rock music. It meant that people like me could play not just, classical music, not just
that there's
jazz.
anything wrong with that.
But I do love classical music.
Well, good.
And Chris said he's not going to leave until class. No.
Back in this hour.
But I think it's about family. And that's what the show on Saturday is about too. I mean, Chris and I met, through Rosie, who just brings people in to play music, and then they find each other and they play places. And I tell people that partnerships take being brave and being open. And I had to be brave to ask. I think he had to be really open to say yes. And even when I've played with his band, later, a couple times in the past years, they're like a family. And music is a family sport. And in fact, when you're on the road, it's very much like being part of a space crew, getting along. You don't get to pick everybody on your crew, right? And how to get along. And
uncomfortable outfits, as we've heard about already.
Exactly. But I was going to say that I think they like me because when I show up in Boston, when they're playing in Boston, I bring fresh tomatoes from Putinsky's farm stand.
Nice.
Yep.
Shameless plug to our local heroes.
Well, but because real things on the road, not just like food from somewhere. It's like food from somebody's farm.
Yeah. It's no astronaut ice cream, but it'll do.
Also, I feel like it's the most prog rock thing to play Ian Anderson's flute in space. Like, what could be proggier than that?
Yeah. Maybe if you played on the dark side of the moon, perhaps.
We need the new suits for that.
That's right.
Well, and actually we had a robot up there, and they were going to program the robot. I mean, it's really how to move his fingers, and he was going to move his fingers to do the keys, and I would be like hanging off on the side, providing but then can't do everything on the mission.
Can't do everything. That is astronaut Katie Coleman from Shelburne, and
Robot flautists on the moon.
Yes, and Chris Devine, the multi-instrumentalist, who is going to be part of the tribute to Jethro Tull this Saturday in Amherst at the Drake, called Minstrels in the Gallery. Katie Coleman will be accompanying them on stage, and they are going to perform for us live in the studio in just a little bit. I'm Monty Belmonte.
I'm Clee Smith. You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on NEPM.
Welcome back to the Fabulous 413. We are joined in the studio by our resident astronomer from Mondays, Hampshire College astronomer Dr. Salman Hamid, Mr. Universe. We're joined by multi-instrumentalist Chris Devine from the band that pays tribute to Jethro Tull, Minstrels in the Gallery, who will be performing with a special guest this Saturday at the Drake in Amherst, one astronaut who spent nearly 6 months in outer space, off of the planet, one of the few human beings in history who have had that opportunity, Shelburne's Katie Coleman. And you are going to perform a flute duet for us in the studio right now. What are we going to hear, Chris?
This is a little Irish tune. I believe it's called Fanny Power. Is that
true.
right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
It means something different in Europe, I think.
Yes, we know that.
I believe that's the case. Yes.
And I strongly believe in it.
But it's safe here. It's safe here.
It's something that the chieftains asked me. I said, is there something I could play that wouldn't upset all the lawyers and all those kinds of things. And they sent this song up to me, and so it's just something I've loved, and I've played with them sometimes on stage.
Chris Devine and Katie Coleman, who will be performing together, at least to a limited degree. You're going to be a special guest on a couple numbers.
I'm going to play the song that Ian and I played, the Beret.
So you can hear that live.
That's
kind
right.
It's a little more made for duets. Any wild things you want to play for us, Chris?
No, I don't know.
A little hint of...
Play something wild while we've got the next couple minutes here. Chris Devine of Minstrels in the Gallery at the Drake on Saturday. And I remind you, dear listener, he was not playing that instrument until somebody brought a Jethro Tull album over to your house, and you're like, I'm going to go get a flute.
I'm going to go get it.
Inspiration lies anywhere.
Yeah, that is fantastic.
And not to leave Salman out of this conversation.
Yeah. You have to play something on the flute now.
Recently, though, the Chandra X-ray Observatory, they took basically the images that Chandra has taken and made them into music.
How does that work?
It was just out in like the New York Times and different places where it's almost like you're up there discovering black holes with Chandra.
Right. So they are trying to sort of like making astronomy accessible to other senses, and partly it's about for deaf population and for other sort of like, that how would it feel like, I mean, this is not for deaf, but it's for blind population and deaf population. So they're doing different things. So they're doing it with textures, but also for sound. They are doing this thing that you can actually represent images in some sense through sound. I mean, ultimately, there is a parallel conversion because if you think about it, light is also a wave, and so is sound. And so you can do that. And so they are really trying to make a bunch of these images. And Chandra Observatory, their folks actually have been taking a lead on these things. And it's really cool. You can actually sing. You can hear a black hole sing because it has certain types of sort of like waves, the pressure waves that go in. And you can, and our ears won't be able to listen to it, but you can actually move it into
the
range that we can hear, and you can translate that in some sense.
Which is interesting because a lot of the things that the new James Webb Space Telescope is doing is not in the visible light spectrum for us to see anyway, so it's already interpreted images to make it accessible for our human eyes. Why not continue to take these interpretations and turn them into other glorious things like music?
Well, also it's neat because there's sort of a societal like connection too. Like Aborigines have sung maps. Like you sing the landscape in order to find your way across the continent. And so there's a precedent for this that's already historically there. It's kind of awesome that it's now being expanded to include the cosmos.
It's exploration.
Right?
And it all comes together with astronomy and music and outer space. Our three guests, it's been a delight to have all of you here. Our regular Monday astronomer, Hampshire College astronomer, Dr. Salman Hamid, Mr. Universe, Chris Devine, who will be with his band Minstrels at the Gallery this Saturday at the Drake with a very special guest, astronaut, Colonel Katie Coleman from Shelburne, Massachusetts. Thank you.
Don't forget Doctor.
Doctor. I said it at the beginning.
From UMass.
From UMass. Doctor from UMass. Said it at the beginning. I said I wouldn't do it every time, but I did want to put it in there. Doctor Katie Coleman, thank you all so very much for coming in today. It's been our pleasure. Tomorrow, in the Fabulous 413, is former President Trump about to get arrested? We'll hear from Professor of Law at Western New England University, Jennifer Taub.
And a conversation with Janet Elber and Ann Soder from Martha Graham Dance Company, who are performing a resurrected lost work of the icon at UMass this weekend.
And we will cuddle baby goats at Thomas Farm in Sunderland. Our director is Tony O'Dear Dunn.
Our engineer is Betsy. You want how many people in this studio, Cordis?
Our technical team is Kara, sizing up the CD Library Foster, Bart, Hippie Stoves Rankin, and Punk Rock Dubé.
Musical thanks to Spouse, Happy Valley Guitar Orchestra, David Bowie, Jethro Tull, and Minstrels in the Gallery.
Not to mention live, Katie Coleman and Chris Devine.
Indeed, I'm Khalees Smith.
And I'm Monty Belmonte.
We'll see you tomorrow in the Fabulous 413.